Hello, you're watching Head to Head on UATV, and I am Oles Gardyuk. On June 28th, Ukrainians celebrate the Constitution Day around the country. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, it took lawmakers 6 years to prepare the document and finally adopt it. These 161 articles are aimed not only at defining the state system of government, but defending the rights of every Ukrainian citizen. So, is it? To discuss this, we welcome to the studio Markiyan Galabala, former deputy head of the Interim Special Commission for Judges Verification. Hello, and thank you for being with us today.
Hello, Oles.
So, speaking of the Constitution, how would you evaluate the efficiency of the document?
Well, I'd like to say that our Constitution that was adopted in 1996 is one of the best in the world. It's very progressive, yes?
One of the best?
Yeah, one of the best. It's really got a lot of provision that are very actual and progressive comparing with the constitution of other countries. Like the problem is with how these provisions are applied in the practice, because very often constitutional provisions provide the best defense for the human rights.
Yeah, the best values, basically.
Yeah, sure, but unfortunately on the level of the legislation, on the practice, especially regarding the practice of law enforcement body, this provision are hardly applied to the relations between people, yes? And the problem is how these progressive provisions of our Constitution are really applied.
But does our law comply with the Constitution? Fully comply?
Not all the laws are really in compliance with the Constitution. That's why we got a constitutional court which provides the control over the law drafting of the Verkhovna Rada, and it's not very often, but seldom it happens that laws that are adopted by the Verkhovna Rada, by our parliament, are in contradiction, in contradiction with the Constitution. And that's why our Constitutional Court provides the constitutional control over these laws. Unfortunately, as far as you remember, Oles, during two last years, the Constitutional Court had not possibility to hear cases, and just a few months ago the new head of the Constitutional Court was appointed, and now they start, they renew their work, and they made a lot of decisions regarding the unconstitutionality of some laws that have been adopted by the Verkhovna Rada.
So a lot of work is still waiting for them now.
Sure.
Well, but during these 22 years that the Constitution is functioning, basically, did it become the document that everybody executes to, or did it become the document that everyone is only talking about?
Well, I would like to say that partially. So generally, our state agencies are following the rules that are provided in the Constitution. But, you know, the impact of Soviet practices, of Soviet tradition still influence on the behavior of our state officials, and it's one of the main problem of applying of the Constitution, because sometimes it's easier to change the legislation, but it's hard to change the modus operandi, how our state officials still do their practices, bad practices or good practices.
Well, of course, it's about the judiciary system functioning in Ukraine, and today there is a coincidence that the law about the creation of anti-corruption court just came into force. What is this law about? What is your evaluation? What's in the law, basically in the law which was voted?
Well, it's a very important law in my point of view. I would like to recall the events, 2 years events that have been taking place in 2016. There was the new law on judiciary and status of judges, which provided the creation of this anti-corruption court. But unfortunately, for 2 years, President and members of Parliament didn't want to realize this idea and to make it into practice. And it was so hard for the civil society, for our international partners to push this idea. And we succeeded in this year, and this law was adopted. Another law on creation of anti-corruption court has been adopted by the Parliament and was signed by the President, and it's a real success. So this law provides the creation of special anti-corruption court, which will hear the cases on the ground corruption, which are prepared by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. And very nice idea in this law is regarding the selection process, because for the first time in Ukrainian history, our international partners will be engaged in this process of selection to provide more independence for the judges of this anti-corruption court. So I believe that very soon the selection process will be started, and we will see the new candidates which will be the future judges of this court. So I really think that this is a success of Ukrainian authorities, of Ukrainian civil society and our international partners.
So basically the appointment of the anti-corruption judges was the most scandalous issue about this bill, and now it's a law. And Ukrainian MPs were standing their ground that Ukrainian side should appoint the judges, but finally the international partners, eventually they will.
They will be the part of this process. So they
but
will,
do they have their functions are like do they recommend the judges to be appointed, or do they have some kind of legal force?
Well, I'd like to say that first of all, Ukrainian legislation provides some stages of appointing of judges. The bottom level is High Qualification Commission of Judges, then the High Council of Judges, and then the decree of the President. Well, international partners will be engaged just on the bottom stage of this selection process. Yes, their role there will be crucial. And this was demanded by the Venice Commission. They say that it's in compliance with the Ukrainian constitution. I absolutely agree that engagement of international partners in the bottom level of the selection process does not contradict and violates Ukrainian constitution. It's absolutely legal. Then there will be a decision of the High Council of Justice, and there are no representation of our international partners, of the foreigners. So there will be no violation of Ukrainian sovereignty, for sure.
Well, let's hope that this new creation of the anti-corruption court will be a giant plus in whole Ukraine's judiciary system. But speaking of the constitution, it has been going through a lot of changes, through a lot of editorial. But for example, in the United States, they haven't been changing their constitution for around 200 years. And we have our constitution functioning only for 22 years now. And we had we started changing it in 2000, 2004, then 2010, and now we're also about to vote for some amendments. Is it bad or good to change the main document of the country so often?
Well, I would like to say that in my point of view, there is a kind of misunderstanding that the Constitution of the United States have not been changed, because it was in fact changed by the interpretation of the Constitution by the Supreme Court of the United States. Because yes, the law, the Constitution, there was no amendments to American Constitution, but in fact it was changed, it was amended by the interpretation of its provision by the Supreme Court. You know, Ukrainian constitution and our judicial system have a little bit another approach to that. Yes, our Supreme Court have no power, in fact, to change constitution by its rulings, by its decision. We are in another legal system, and that's why we have to change and amend our constitution by the laws of the Verkhovna Rada.
Could you remind us those changes and evaluate were they progressive or negative?
Well, generally, there was a few amendments to Constitution which were related to revolutionary events in Ukraine. Yeah, as far as you remember, when there was Orange Revolution in 2004, there was a compromise between representatives of Mr. Yushchenko, our president, and Mr. Kuchma, our former president, yes, to make this, to change the system of ruling the country. That was one of the amendments. Then it was then it was cancelled by the Constitutional Court and Mr. Yanukovych, and it was really an unconstitutional decision, and it was applied by a Ministry of Justice. So it also was a kind of flashback by our constitution system. And in 2016 there was very nice amendments regarding the judiciary, which were initiated by the President Poroshenko, and they're really progressive. They increased the independence and impartiality of judiciary in Ukraine.
Which is good. Yeah. Well, but yeah, before Ukraine was switching kind of from the presidential parliamentary state to parliamentary presidential. And now we still have this discussion ongoing. There are two ideas how to change the structure of government. And I would like to have your opinion about those two. Like idea number one is to solve dualism of power. Ukraine might become parliamentary state only, with prime minister ruling the country and gaining the functions of chancellor. Presidential role would become more representative, and the parliament would consist of two acting chambers, and the MPs would be selected within elections or parliamentary or only parliamentary voting. What is your take on this kind of proposition?
I absolutely agree that there is like a conflict in ruling the country by the cabinet of the ministers and the administration and the president. In fact, administration of the president. So it looks like that we have two cabinet of ministers. We have the cabinet of ministers, in fact, and administration of the president. It's really
always they're divided. There are good ones and bad ones.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we shall, for sure, we shall solve this problem.
But how to solve it? Do you think that this scheme is a way to solve it? To become a parliamentary country?
I think that we shall move in this parliamentary field because we are part of Europe, and if we compare the majority of the constitutional systems in our neighbors from Western Europe, the majority is of this system is concerned with a strong prime minister, which rules the country, yes? And I think that we should follow this example.
But also, I would like to know your opinion about MPs being appointed after the parliamentary voting. Isn't it dangerous?
It's hard to say. Discussable question. I think that we shall keep this system of voting for the members of parliament like that, but we shall change how the voters.
You mean the whole nation elections?
Yeah, the whole nation for sure.
Okay. Well, I want also to ask about the second idea. Well, the second idea how Ukraine can prosper more is to decrease the amount of MPs in the parliament, and there is an idea to cancel the representation by the major districts, constituencies, and to vote only by party lists.
I agree that I'll start from the end of your question. It's okay to vote for just for the party list, but it should be open lists. The idea that are pushing by the civil society, for sure, I support this idea. Another question is about the number of the members of parliament. I think that generally it's okay because the factual number of the members of parliament is not 415 because Russia Federation have been occupied Crimea and have been occupied Donbass, and this region do not have the possibility to send their representatives to Verkhovna Rada. That's why we don't don't have the possibility to elect 450 members of parliament, but generally it's okay if we especially compare with the Italian parliament, where there are something like thousands of members of parliament. So
wow.
Generally, our situation is quite good.
There is an idea to decrease by 300 or even by 250.
No, it's not an issue. In my point of view, it's not the issue, the members of parliament.
Okay, and the very last question, because we're running out of time, unfortunately, but there is another probably amendment awaiting for Ukrainian constitution. Petro Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, has recently suggested recording Ukraine's aspirations to European and Euro-Atlantic integration into the constitution. What is your take on that?
Well, there are advantages and disadvantages of this idea. Because generally, it looks a little bit strange that this provision will be kept in the constitution. Because we don't know how will be the events be developed. Because there is a possibility. That there is a possibility. I think that's minimal. I don't want this possibility to be realized, that there will be no European Union or NATO in the future after 15 years. Mm-hmm. It's possible, because even Soviet Union has disappeared from the map of the world. So, and to push to keep it in the constitution, this provision, it's I don't know, it's okay. But from another point of view, if, for example, the government will be changed and there will be come to force the members of parliament and other state officials that support the the movement to Russia, that will help us, mm-hmm. To prevent this movement.
Be unconstitutional.
This will be unconstitutional. The same situation have been in Lithuania, as far as I remember, because there was a kind of return to the power of communists, and then they could not change the movement of Lithuania to Europe and to NATO, because there was, in fact, constitutional provision that put it where this state should be moved to.
Well, thank you so much for your interesting comments, and thank you for this conversation. That was Markiyan Galabala, former deputy head of the Interim Special Commission for Judges Verification. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Oles Garjuk. Goodbye.